Well, thank you for asking me to speak at Tea Talks. Seung-Hee Kim, as Seung-Hee said, Voices from Oxford has been here since 2009. Tea Talks have been around in Oxford for a year, so congratulations on the way things are moving. We've done many interviews at Balliol in its 750th anniversary 3 years ago. Since then, Voices from Oxford have interviewed many of our guests from around the world, including from China. And we mustn't forget a rather strange interview I did with Boris Johnson at midnight as well. So many thanks to Seung-Hee Kim and Voices from Oxford. I was asked to talk about why read poetry, and in particular perhaps why young people should read poetry. Well, that's a generic question. The poetry could be by a rapper. It could be by Nobel laureate Bob Dylan. It could be by Byron. Could be by Shakespeare. And so the answer to that question, I think, has got itself to be generic. And it has to do with humankind, and particularly, and possibly even all of animal kind, being, in a sense, pattern recognition machines. We deal with the world by recognizing patterns, recurrences, and through recurrences, non-recurrences. Language, music, mathematics all depend on our recognition of patterns. Our recognition of the underlying pattern tells us that the cat sat on the mat makes sense, whereas the mat sat on the cat is at best problematic. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are is fine. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the firmament, is not. It's like a wrong note played on a piano. You recognize the pattern, and then it goes wrong. But when Wilfred Owen writes, "Move him into the sun," gently it woke him once, at home, whispering of fields unknown. Always it woke him, even in France, until this morning in this snow. Owen knows perfectly well that his readers will hear the off-key rhymes. Sun unsown, once France. And the poem, of course, is called Futility, about a death in the First World War, and the rhymes too, like the life, have failed. And for those of you who know the poem, count the lines, the total lines of the poem, and see what other pattern is hidden there and also fails. So poetry is densely patterned language. If a medical researcher wants to understand a problem, he or she goes to an area where there are a lot of occurrences of that problem. A lot of events, they slightly euphemistically call it. Poetry is high event language. It's more organized than prose. Rhythm, rhyme, assonance, wordplay, figurative language. That doesn't mean that you as a reader always notice the organization. Even rhyme can be hidden, and intricate rhythms can be difficult to hear, and only a trained reader will hear some rhymes internal to a word, or initial assonance, or whatever. But nearly all of us will hear when something goes wrong. And in good poetry, that going wrong is usually intentional, as it was in the Owen I've quoted. It's just like music. Unless you happen to have perfect pitch, you will not have a clue in Western music which key is being played. But as soon as there is a change of key, you will hear the change because you have got used to the underlying pattern. Poetry works the same way. And because of that, the patterns that poetry uses in any language have to be recognizable in that language and they differ markedly from one language to another. If you want to experience language then at its most intense, you should read or listen to poetry. Why should you want to hear language at its most intense? Because we all need to recognize how language is using us. If we just accept what we read or what we hear as a given, we remain unaware of how language conditions our response to the world. Language manipulates the world we live in. The way it is organized not only affects the meaning, in many ways it is the meaning. Sometimes we only realize the way language colors our world when we learn another language and see how different the world looks through its medium. Does it have a first person singular? Does it have a word for I? Some languages don't. Do its verbs exist in time? All our verbs in English do. Or in social space? None of our verbs in English do. Critical differences in how we conceive the world. So like the medics, if you want to understand how language is using you, go to where it has its greatest number of events in concentrated form. Go to poetry. Relish its patterns, its linguistic shapes, and even more, be shocked by its asymmetries. And how do you best learn to appreciate these patterns, to see the hidden rhymes, the concealed symmetries, the rhythmic changes of pace? Try writing poetry. That's how. Wordsworth said poetry should be emotion recollected in tranquility. Emotion, in other words, given a shape. By trying to write poetry, you'll find out a lot about the language you use normally without thinking. And in finding out about language, you will find out about yourself. We come into being in language. We need to really understand how it works and what the limits are it imposes on itself and therefore on us. Read poetry. Write poetry. Thank you.